Wow. All
Got it.
right. Welcome, Coby.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited to speak with you.
Yeah,
And I'm going to start by reading your bio and then we can jump in. Yeah?
sounds great.
Okay. So, Coby Leibman. Coby Leibman is a somatic practitioner, a chef, a wild forager, a lover of plants, people, and all wild beings. He creates events and healing circles to build community, culture, and vitality.
Hmm.
Coby also runs a private practice as a somatic experiencing practitioner and spiritual coach, and offers youth rites of passage programs and wilderness trips for adults and youth in Sonoma County. His primary teachers have been Martine Prechtel, Malidoma Somé, Sabanfu Somé, as well as Keith and Shane Pache from Dakota Teepee. And I'm going to close this little document. Yeah. So, and I just want to say that we know each other from the work with Malidoma.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I've went to your grief ritual recently. I
Mhm.
got to see you hold that, which was beautiful.
Mhm.
And I just feel, just to be honest, I wouldn't say pedestal, but I just have such great admiration for you. You know, I just feel really moved by the depth of exploration you've done
Mhm.
into your own ancestral lineage,
Mhm.
and then the respect and thoughtfulness and depth that you bring to embodying other lineages that you've been um, granted permission to carry into the world.
Mhm.
Um, wait, let me hide this so I can. I feel like I'm not looking just at you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, then you have all this love, this love of language, which we share.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and incredible cultural experiences from traveling the world. So I just find you to be a very rich, deep, interesting person with so much to share.
Oh,
So,
that's a big compliment coming from someone with the same depth and yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, thank you for all that.
yeah,
Beautiful words.
yeah,
Yeah, it's been yeah, just to name that, I think these last, 6 months since Malidome's Some's passing, Elder Malidoma Some, and the work that we did together, I think, yeah, it's just brought so many memories of all of the ways that, he really reinvigorated that place of connecting deeply with, like, what is the ancestral story that is coming through for each of us, and the gifts. And yeah, I still very strongly in this moment feel his presence, kind of like, he was a water person in the Dagara calendar. And there's this very much like, yeah, the water being the reconciliation, and how we work through these big and uh, times that we're in, and what is emergent. And um, just really feeling in this conversation that presence of him continuing to, like, work on us in, what are we stepping into in these times. And yeah, uh, um, just presencing him. And
beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a little picture of him right here. I
Nice.
can share with people. Oh, let's see. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, that's such a
Yeah,
good one.
I love this. So, welcome, Malidoma, too. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you said a lot already, and in terms of the piece that I'm really holding, what you said is just this. Well, how do we hold everything that's happening right now in the world, right?
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that you you offered was this grief ritual. And last time we had to reschedule our conversation. There had just been 2 shootings,
Yeah.
right? And so I was very aware of, oh, this is the medicine we need.
Yeah.
We need these grief rituals, right? There was the Buffalo, New York, and there was Uvalde, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a state of just frozen numbness for a few days. And then I was able to access my grief and anger. And then I was able to access some actions.
Yeah.
But maybe we could start there. Last week was Roe versus Wade. There's just one wave after another. And so I would love if you could speak to that, holding the ancient wisdom and the modern insanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, I think these are we're watching a lot of unmetabolized grief in my mind, manifesting as violence, as oppression in our communities, as these big movements of that how when the grief that Malidoma really talked about grief and Sambonfu as this tension or this divide, disconnect from really like those old ancestral lineages, what we come from, and we all come from these like people. We tend to, especially white-bodied folks, tend to idealize, just like the BIPOC, like indigenous people of this land, but really like, and which have beautiful traditions, but really we like the European and the like Russian and all these other, the Central Asian culture had amazing rituals and depth, and we all come from that. These like wild rivers of memory in our bones of knowing how to be deeply related with the storylines and the plants and the beings and the ancestors that we were in constant ritual with on a regular basis. Like anytime there was a tension, there was ritual to kind of like bring that pressure valve down. And I think one of the biggest things Malidoma kind of opened up for me was how to build bridges, right? And one of the first divinations I did with him, he gave me all these rituals. I was going to Poland and the Ukraine and Crimea, Tajikistan, some of the places my peoples come from. And he, like in this divination we did together, the mat gets spread out, all the bones are there, and he and shells, and he just started reading like where are the disconnects there, what are the like places of rupture, and I think, and he gave me all these rituals while I was there to really like make offerings at these certain rivers, make agreements with those places to like rekindle the bridge with that place, and make an offering to this tree when you find it there. And I would find these like giant flint stones at the base of I found this flint stone at the base of the tree that was shaped as a skull, and just like beautiful like little moments of where spirit is just like so available to us in that way. And I think it's really when we show up and we ask, and when we do it in community, that that there is a place for some of this to be held, because I don't think we can do we can't hold some of the griefs of our times in this like vacuum of like a closed door behind, by ourselves, just like trying to move through the grief. and you know, the tremendous waves of loss of what we've been disconnected from. Like, we need all of the relationships with the plant communities, the human communities, the spirit community, the ancestor, you know, like the Catumbla, little people, all the ones, you know, like just as we invoked in the beginning, you know, we need that. Like, healing doesn't take place for me just in like one body. It's connected to like all of the lineages and the agreements we made with ancestors, we made with the land in order to like keep little seeds alive, because we're like the fruits of these big ancestral trees. But the only reason we're continuing to flower is because our ancestors loved so deeply, so fully with their bodies, that they made these pacts for keeping all that they loved alive in those moments and in those agreements. So for me, yeah, and I often talk in these big circles, but you know, really coming back to like how we meet this moment with all the tragedies that are here. And I think, you know, yeah, we have to like keep presencing our ability to like be with, you know, the pain that is there, to not like disassociate. And but we need bigger baskets, we need bigger containers to hold really the depth of all of the accumulated disconnect come from like our society, our culture right now just drives the collective story of disconnect, of separation, of, you know, that kind of Descartes, like, you know, head separated from the body. And but everything in our bodies and our bones knows, you know, in some way. And so it's like, how do we call in all of the support and community to hold this bigger basket of what the grief that is just flowing right now is like palpable in the air, you know, you can just feel it around us. In letting it have a place, you know, we talked about Malidoma being of the water and reconciliation, but like having it a place where it can be metabolized into something else. Right? Find the soil to water something that is emergent and between us and interconnected in reciprocity of like, you know, sprouting new life, new seeds popping up. And I think we are the seeds in many ways too. And seeds are like this incredible metaphor too of like how much, you know, they are the product of thousands of years of interrelationship with us, right? And these agreements that were made and carrying the seeds when there was like very little hope to the next land. And so yeah, how we take the grief, how we take the water and feed it back into, yeah, the larger soil, to really like be in curiosity of like, how can we emerge with pulling back the veil and really be present with like the bigger ancestral stories of what spirit, what, you know, is being called for to be met in these times with all of our ritual presence in that way, you know. And I think we're here for that reason, you know, our ancestors called our bodies over so that we could be here in this time, you know, and really emerge in that way of meeting this moment, because they knew we had the capacity, we were chosen, you know, for these times. So yeah.
Let me take a moment to, because there were so many threads there. I just want to kind of metabolize the word you used, metabolize a little bit myself. So there are certain words that popped out as you spoke. First of all, as you just spoke of all the agreements and all the different, the nature spirits, the water spirits, the ancestors, right? I mean, the room whatever kind of room we have over Zoom started getting very full. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
it's just so beautiful and so important because we in our culture, in the mainstream culture, tend to think of ourselves as these just, I'm Aninha, and that's the end of the story. I'm just this individual.
Yeah.
And there's so much more happening.
Yeah.
And there's so much more help available,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Surrounded by it.
yes.
And it's amazing, just like when we ask with reverence, when we invoke, when we call them, it like how much is present for us too.
Yeah.
I'm just always like so floored by like, whew, just how much is waiting to support. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I have looked toward, and a lot of people I know have looked toward more intact lineages to learn how the hell do you plug back.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful that there's a lot of people excavating European lineages.
Yeah.
But so far, what I've found most useful are the ones that have been most intact. And then what I'm realizing is that all the medicine is in my bones. It's just getting activated and helped kind of directed in a more clear way. But the medicine is my ancestral medicine.
Yeah.
And that's been a recent clarification. Struggling with appropriation and things like that. And I was like, oh, okay. I've kind of been giving some training wheels to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sticking to that. I wrote down a couple words you said. You were talking about being white-bodied and what that means in relation to these traditions. So I wanted to also just give a moment for that.
Yeah.
What's that like for you? And
yeah, I mean, and you're speaking so eloquently to like intactness and like what that actually means. And I think you're absolutely right that there's less of that rupture happened, that disconnect happened farther back for many white-bodied folks, and so there is I feel like there is so much more that is available and present when I speak with some of my, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and I feel like they really should be leading the way. I feel like it's like in a lot of the suppression of their voice and just incredible colonization of violence against those communities. I want to lift their voices and be kind of standing back a little bit, I would say, from really taking those central roles, and I think just speaking to the lineages, both Malidoma and Martine, which I kind of base a lot of the grief ritual work on what they have been, and Sombomfu a lot too. She was the main one who was carrying grief rituals in this country until she passed, and then Malidoma took back some of those, practicing some of those rituals and grieving big things in his life and what was practiced here. But a lot of what they gifted in some way was really it's watching this culture. Malidoma is friend of the enemy, watching this culture that is destroying itself, destroying the world, in many cases was destroying the Dagara people. And so they sent this emissary out to sow some seeds in the belly of the enemy of how to work with what is consuming them, what is causing this cycle of violence of how do we meet that with a gift, to meet violence with a gift,
wow.
whew. And so I don't take that. It took me a long time to really even feel like I could and I spoke with Malidoma about holding grief rituals, and I spoke with some Bonfu, and and there's this way that, yeah, like, if you're borrowing someone's pot, and there's this gift given, like, you want to make sure that you're like really filling it up. And so, yeah, like, I think it's so important, to just really be giving back to those communities where this is from too. And so, like, every ritual, we really give a good percentage back to Wisdom Bridge, and some Bonfu's water organization, and just make sure that, like, yeah, we're really honoring, like, the gift of where this is from, and also recognizing that, yeah, like, yeah, that there is just there's these incredible legacies of violence, that, colonization and structural racism that are very, very present. And being clear that, like, the spaces that we are opening up, we are trying to hold a lot of, the healing that needs to come through, but that those forces are big, and, like, and I think speaking with other Black bodied folks in the Malidoma community, Ty and Cheryl and Kurt, it's like, it's hard to, like, hold that space with other white people. And I don't have clear answers for all of it.
Yeah.
I think we're in this emergent curiosity, and I'm like playing, meeting up with Ty, and, like, we're like finding what are the layers of, also, like, because there's what Malidoma talked about too, is there's these layers of race and this strong history, but there's also, like, all these, the Dagara believe, like, half of us are from other planets and other stars, and that we have, these spirit bodies tied to these plants and elements, and there's all these other classifications within that we're moving. And so, like, how do we also, not to jump right over race, like, race needs to be there, it needs to be present and healed, but, like, how do we also hold the container for, like, all of, like, what is present between us? How do we lay, there's a really beautiful man, Aaron Johnson, from holistic resistance, that he says, how do we lay our head on each other's hearts? How do we lay down, like, on each other's chests? Just, like, really listen to all the layers of magic that is there, because it's not, pain is really present, and we need to, like, address it and be there with it and hold it and grieve it, but we also need to, like, be rekindling the magic. And there's layers of that between us, that I think can happen simultaneously. And yeah, the somatic work that I do, I think really, I do a lot of work with other folks, just, like, shaking this stuff out of our body, or, like, really, like, letting some of where these initial traumas are held, and that replicate systems, structures of violence through, like, our inability to hold them. How we start to, like, collectively in communities find the ways that magic, all the layers can come out, the agreements, the interconnectedness, those networks of connection. And yeah, I think I definitely, and just as you named, have been deeply influenced by these traditions, that I try to be in really good communication around how I'm borrowing from them. And, this in January, I'm going to Burkina Faso with Alwyn to like go speak with Malidoma's family about, like how, what continuing those conversations, and be in good communication with those communities, rooted in those communities, not like just go in my own, oh, this is emergent now, right? Like I really want to be like feeding back into the gift and like agreements with that gift. But also, yeah, being present for all the layers of what is emergent, what is needed in these times. How do we really lift each other up in this co-liberation? Because white people grieving their traumas, is that, I feel that's one of the biggest parts of how this violence continues, is just how much accumulated trauma we have and grief we have in our systems, from that disconnect, from the witch trials, the crusades, the like tearing away from the land of those old matriarchal cultures, and how that continues to be built into structures of violence. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you naming the territory and also naming it in a very kind of multidimensional way.
Yeah.
And I'm struck by what you said, because as we spoke of this idea of encompassing conversations is how do we bring otherworldly magic and nonlinear thought and right
Curiosity.
this like and curiosity to these very literal challenges, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just
It's almost the categorization and the classification of everything that is killing all. That is part of white supremacy. That is part of the disconnect. It's believing that like we know, like we don't know. There's so much mystery, and when we open to the wonder of that, just like this reverent, like curiosity of like what is here right now in the magic, there's so much more possibility in moving through it.
yeah, I'm getting a feeling of like fluidity and shapeshifting and
Yeah.
capacity. Like, okay, in this moment, I'm really sitting with race in a very literal way. Oh, and in this moment, whoa, I'm sitting with that we don't even know who we are and we don't even know where we're from. And oh, in this moment, I'm grieving some ancestral piece. And I just feel you like, oh, we have to learn how to move through all these layers as they shift moment to moment.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm hearing. Not get stuck.
Yeah. And we have to be checking in with each other too along the way too, because I think like Resma Menachem talks about this, but like we can also like be like kind of pushing our own stuff through other bodies too, and like not totally aware of like our own connections, our own stories. And so yeah, there's I think as we stay interconnected and in that complexity and all those layers, we're also like really watching for the feedback of like what needs to be fed in this moment, and what is happening in those other bodies around me. Do I need to like, and that's grief ritual space, right? That's the space where we're holding space behind someone for them to move through whatever is coming through, but we're not fixing them. We're not like doing some spirit magic. We're just witnessing and being present with what is there and letting it move, letting it ground as a core through our own being, right? So yeah, it's the active, and it's also just the really witnessing the world through the magic of what is grounding through my body right now too, right? And, yeah, and doing that in a dance with one another, like letting it be emergent. And that's why, I mean, I was just like, the first grief ritual I went to, I was floored with like, wow, what, like in the gift of that, and like what I watched move through people, and how Son Bonfu could take people who were like in these like various layers of distress and psychological, and just witness, be with it, and like give it a place to like feed something else.
I love this. You keep coming back to feeding something else, which is so outside of the culture I was raised in, right?
Right.
And I don't know if you want to just say anything about. So this feeding seems very
Yeah. That's a big part of like Martine Prechtel, and Malidoma and some both, we talked about it as well. But just that these agreements that we have with the world around us, the plant ones, like every time we eat, every time we take in food, we are honoring an old agreement with these plant beings that decided to like intertwine themselves in our lives in order to like feed the people. Like teosinte, corn, was this little grass that like through countless prayers and tending of this little seedlet came into this corn being, and like corn is the people that like that they would not exist, like for all the people who carry those lineages of corn and are deeply enmeshed, which Martine comes from those people, like we are corn, the people are, we are here because of that agreement, because of that feeding of their life and the way they feed back to us, that echo of reciprocity that comes. And in our culture we have these GMOs and these like dishonor, and we've forgotten our side of the agreement. We've forgotten how to feed back to the corn, and we're in this extractive, how do we get as much? And obviously illness comes from that total lack of feeding that soul. So yeah, there's this reciprocity of how do we honor these like thousands of year old agreements with our ancestors, with plants, with like our ancestors made certain agreements to stay alive too, and they brought certain spirit helpers. There's we have these like spirit helpers that have been like passed through generation. The Dagara speak of them as genies or dog, but these like lineages of relationship with these spirit beings, and they all need to be fed, or else they go mad, right? They turn into cycles of violence in our society because they're hungry, they're starved. And
well, let's like pause there. That's huge.
yeah.
So, well, first of all, I just want to name that agreements is a new concept to me outside of like, Caroline Mace or something like. So this is, I'm curious about that and want to hear more.
Yeah.
What you're saying right now. So you spoke of the violence in terms of colonization and all the trauma that Europeans hold that we haven't processed ourselves, European Americans.
Yeah.
But now you're talking about a whole nother thing. Violence coming from not feeding the spirits. Can you say more about that? That's not something you hear much about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's old in that like all of the old tales of, or even in this land, Pomo land, when we forgot how to sing to that mother river that gives the headwater, she suddenly went back into the cave in the And, there was drought for many years when we forgot how to, speak the right words to the ones that we were hunting, the deer ones or whatever. Or we in all the old fairy tales, if you don't butcher just that right way and honor and make the gift they stop showing up, right? They stop. And then in many of those tales, those old mythologies and folklore, that spirit that is left unfed, and maybe they disappear for a while, but they usually come back as a monster in some form, or a spirit that is attacking the village in some way, or attacking the community. And it's usually, there's an old story in New Mexico about that this beast of the corn, that they forgot the relationship, and they forgot to honor the sisters that came down from the hills. And so this beast showed up, and they had to, and it was a beautiful metaphor, they had to break down all the parts of the grief in the monster. They had to remember in their bodies what was not fed, what that grief was, in order to break apart the parts and turn that monster into another form that went back into. And so there's something around how we don't, like ascend or, transmute these, like how we stay with the grief, right? How we name the different parts of the disconnect. And then we make a blessing to what we've forgotten. We feed that place that has been forgotten. And for people like me, we come, and white-bodied folks, we come from lineages that are so taught about disconnection, right? We don't have that more current history of intactness. So it's like, where do I even start with that? Where do I even start to feed the griefs that are there? But you find one thing, you find one food that you can remember from your people, and you make an offering to that food, and you speak eloquently to her of like how she kept the people alive. For me, it's like buckwheat. I just like study everything around, like, buckwheat one that like comes from that like central Crimea, like how it kept people alive. And my grandma used to make it as kasha, and like how I speak to like the little threads that were kept alive, and I make offerings to her, and like every time I eat that one, I speak to that one and like, thank you for coming. So it's like how we start blessing and feeding as a blessing those different parts of that accumulated grief that is showing up as a monster right now in our society, and how we start making a blessing in the face of that violence that's showing up, just as the Dagra did,
right?
Giving a gift in the face of the most extreme violence. Like, how do we, that to me, that is just like, how
Yeah,
can I be
your heart.
someone,
how
can I be someone worth descending from, that
Mm.
teaches a little piece of how to remember and how to feed and give a gift in the face of this violence. Yeah.
So beautiful. Just as you were putting your hand on your heart, I was like, oh my God, there's just so much heart in this. We have to be able to contact our hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
beautiful. And as you were speaking, part of me was like, just imagining the people listening. And I was like, see, this is what I wanted you to hear. Coby has so much wisdom here. It's so you.
But it's all, it's not me. It's all these teachers, it's just like, I'm thinking what all these people, what they were able to keep alive, right? And they gave as a gift. And it's like, I get to share little pieces of what was kept alive and the gift and all those spirit, all of them, it's just like, may I be a hollow bone.
I'm with you there.
For like them to come, for spirit to come through. Yeah.
Yeah, so not to get it too personal, but I just to acknowledge, that you are a beautiful hollow bone for this. Somehow you have enough memory in your bones for this to be very alive and very authentic and integrated. And there's an ease. It feels like there's an ease. Like, of course I would do this. Of course I would speak to the buckwheat. That's how it feels when I speak to you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to name something else, which is, a lot of these things can, when disconnected, they can just feel like a little new age.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to pray over my food or whatever. It can be beautiful.
Yeah.
But what's coming to me is, Malidoma called his training the Indigenous African Spiritual Technologies, right? And the word technology is not something you would normally think about with this.
Right. Right.
And so when you're speaking about grief and what are all the different components, that word comes up again. There's a technology behind this.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
They cultivated for thousands of years. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I think, yeah, in when some Bonfu or Malidoma would speak about village, it was just like ritual. Like when's we just did a ritual, when's the next ritual to like tend to the next part? We divinate on what needs to be fed, and then we do a ritual to do that, and then we do a ritual, and like whew, yeah, I was even listening to like a talk he did a couple days ago where he was saying, all of the people who were diviners had to go into the water at one point in the year, and they had to, with all of the money that they had gotten, all the gifts that were given of their record, and they had to go into the river with these gifts on them, and with this place of reconciliation, of like cleansing, and they had to emerge from the waters without a drop of water on them, right? That there was this like ritual for that. And it just struck me so deeply of like that nothing is taken for granted. Little sharp-shinned hawk just landed right on the tree. Okay. Hi, Malidoma. Yeah. That nothing that these are old agreements, technologies. In order for, you watch like some of the Dagra around their ritual, their blacksmiths, their agreements with the metals, and it is a technology to be able to, there's a spiritual price for pulling that kind of material from the earth, right? And they have learned the songs, the rituals, the like feeding, over thousands of years of working with these ones in the fire, of like how to be in right relationship with those, beings where they don't become the monster, right? And that is, to me, like the most amazing technology. Like, not this technology of like, this lie of, endless resources and endless expansion, because we all know it's finite. We all know that a lot of Western culture, how the Judeo-Christian translated is, you can like transmute these, like you can our sins or whatever, we can that heaven is not here on earth to be fed, but it's somewhere up there, and then we can just say a couple of prayers, and then we don't have to do anything, or Hail Marys, and then it's gone, where but how we are in deep relationship of regenerative technologies that don't create these monsters, and I think that's what Dagara, Martine, you know, they come from people who had these like intricate rituals of how to be in right relationship, how to tend, how to feed, right? Because when we have these agreements intact, or we even have the inkling of how we're in agreement with these beings, then we have a sense of like, you know, how to make everything in the community thrive. You know, it's not just about how I get what I want when I want it. It's like, how does, when I go and harvest, you know, these wild foods, like picking some huckleberries or whatever, what is the agreement with that plant? What is it like? And every time I do it, I break off the tips of the plants, just like the grazers do, right? And in that place, it's like them meeting the deer that sometimes grow, or the bears that graze on them. They branch out with these antlers, with like 25 new branches where you break off that tip. And all of those little branches have more huckleberries on them, right? And so there's these old agreements that we have with these plants. I would call, you know, and native people knew all of it, how things needed to be burned, how things, I would argue, you know, European people knew that deeply as well. But those are old technologies. And I think the grief of losing those technologies for many white people, and other folks who have lost parts of that is one of the biggest griefs, you know, driving our heart. Like just that feeling of not belonging, of disconnect, of not having our place of, because if you think about it, you're not calling in anymore of that extended revitalization. Like our healing has to take place in the revitalization of everything around us. It has to be interconnected with it. It has to be in deep relationship with it. If it's not in deep relationship, it's very little that can actually move in here, right? And so that disconnect is part of, from that technology, is part of the grief that that keeps us in this, you know, perfectionism, you know, knowing, punctuality, you know, all these parts of kind of like linear, as you named it. And these are, and you know, you look at people who are studying white supremacy and they're like, there it is, that's white supremacy culture. Is the like not listening, not, you know, being in, not feeling the nuance, perfectionism that I can, you know, I have to get this right every time, have to know exactly how to do that. And it's the syndrome, you know, it's the grief of that disconnect in many ways. They're interconnected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware of time, so we'll end
Yeah.
I appreciate everything you're saying, and kind of the thought that comes to mind. I remember Sabanfu, she describing all the different ways grief shows up, right? You know, we think of it as just like, oh, when you're crying or when you're depressed, you know, whether it's the rage or, you know, or what you're saying, the disconnect and the lack of belonging. So I just want to name that.
Yeah, no, it takes so many forms, numbness, the ways that we, and it's relieving that, you know, we often think of grief as this like, oh, but it's really like, it's how we relieve the tension in between us to know that which we love, to close that gap.
Yes.
To remember how much we love that which has been lost or disconnected from, you know?
Yeah.
That's the reweaving there, is the grief. Yeah.
So to end, you know, and if this doesn't feel right, that's fine. But, you know, for people who may be listening and not have had the opportunity to, you know, work with Martine and Malidoma and Sabanfu, what seed would you offer of like a little starting place? If this is kind of new for people, what little seed would you offer?
Oh, Yeah. Yeah, the people I work with, I really have them, pick a few things from where you live, just pick like two beings as you're taking a walk that you feel like deeply curious about them, or there's like, and watch them, like be in relationship with that, like find out what they love, if it's like certain, like I, I guess in my neighborhood there's a Pacific wren nest, just beautiful little wren that makes this like funnel shaped nest and everything, and just studying every part of like how it gathers, what it loves, how it frequents the little wild beehive right there. And there's something in just that sitting and that watching, and like I sing to that little nest sometimes, and that it's just reweaving ourselves back into the little parts of the world that hold that wonder, hold that curiosity for us, choosing a food that we're curious about that grandma used to make, like the buckwheat, and really learning everything you can learn about that being, right? And how to be in good, like what does that being love to like be revitalized? How do I like make one small act that feeds that, like, so when I cut my hair, I bring them all over there, and and I like leave little mounds of what that food that they love, and it's just like starting to weave that like reciprocity of, and they show up. They show up in my dreams, and the other day I went and I was sobbing out near that nest, and three of them came over and were like singing to me while I'm sobbing. They feed back to you. They're so available. And it's just those little steps of beginning to like make a gift. Start to make a gift. Start to know one being in your place, and there's a whole world that can, then you get to know that being, and it like opens up. But as far as, like grief rituals, like there's a lot of really amazing people who are starting to hold them, and from different racial backgrounds and lineages, and finding the community that fits you, and find a place for your grief. Putting a little bowl of salt water by your door, the last thing I'll say. And every time you come in the door, taking a little bit of that salt water and naming, one part of that compartmentalized grief. I'm grieving today a little bit of like the disconnect that I feel from, such and such being, or such and such loved one, or I'm remembering grandpa today, and speaking that grief. And just even some bone food gave us that, as a way to just keep our grief liquid, keep it present with us, so that it has a place to flow, to
you tap the bowl of salt water in front of your door, and then you touch it, and what do you do exactly? You
speak the grief and then sprinkle it on the ground.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, keep the grief liquid.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What a joy.
Yeah, so good to be with you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hold on one second.
Yeah. All right.